Well, thank you so much for this great opportunity to come and talk to you today. What I intend to do in the next 10 to 15 minutes is to share with you some inner thinkings of a company that is certainly living the energy transition and also talk about what are we actually doing with it. 3 to 4 years ago, it was very obvious to us that there were 3 very strong external forces impacting our industry. We had the world mobilizing around the Paris Agreement, not only politicians, but finance, industry, cities, everything. We had oil drop from a top of 110 to 30 US dollars. And we saw more and more markets where solar and wind were the most competitive source of energy generation. Business as usual for us was not an option. We had to change. We introduced something with a new vision saying we're going to shape the future of energy. We don't want to be shaped. We're going to be part of it. And a year ago, we introduced a new strategy that can be summarized in 3 small sentences. Always safe, high value, low carbon. We recognize that we have been part of the problem and we want to be part of the solution. Due to the tremendous cost reductions in renewable, we expect to see a fantastic growth, most likely an exponential growth, primarily of solar and wind. But there's no doubt that we also need oil and gas going forward. And why do I say that? Yes, because if we stop all investments in oil and gas today, the current production will decline with between 3 and 5% every year. And I have yet to see any forecast, any scenario where oil and gas demand is dropping quicker than that. We do believe we need to produce that oil, but we need to produce it with as low of a carbon footprint as possible. And that's where we as an oil and gas or energy industry need to mobilize to get the carbon footprint down from our oil and gas production. About a year ago, we introduced what we call our climate roadmap, and it sets out what we intend to do. We could have looked upon the growth in renewable as a threat. We chose to do the opposite, and we see this as an opportunity where we can utilize a lot of the competence and skill set that we already have in our hands. So by 2030, we have estimated that about 15 to 20% of our investment will go towards renewable. And to put this into perspective, that means that over the next 12 years, we'll probably spend something like 100 billion NOK on renewable. For that same amount of money, we could have bought probably the 5th largest company on the Norwegian Stock Exchange. So we're talking big, big money here. With respect to our research budget, which is deep and well-funded, we expect 25% already in 2020 to focus on what we called low-carbon solutions, including renewable. But we also aim, and we think this is absolutely necessary, to reduce the CO2 footprint of our oil and gas production. So by 2030, we have a very ambitious target to reduce annual accumulated CO2 emissions with 3 million tons by that time. And we aim to be the most carbon efficient producer of oil and gas. Currently, we're producing it with half the CO2 intensity of the industry average, but we've set ourselves a target to go below that to 8 kilo per CO2, 8 kilo CO2 per BOE. Methane emission has been mentioned here before, is something that we monitor and aim to reduce as much as we can. When we looked at where could we contribute, it was important for us to reuse some of the skill sets that we have developed over the 45 years in the oil and gas business. We are the largest oil and gas offshore operator in the world. So jumping into offshore wind made a lot of sense for us. We're reusing a lot of the large project management skill set that we have used in the oil and gas industry. We've got tons of experience with marine operations in tough environments. We've also got, as I mentioned already, a deep and very competent R&D organization located here in Trondheim. And I think that's important. We're a big company. We've got robust financial situation. We can afford to take long-term bets. And this energy transition needs long-term bets. A very good example is the Hywind concept, the floating offshore wind concept, that we started looking at already around 2000, and it was put into production only last year. Can you imagine any small startups that would continue to get funding from external sources for 17 years? I don't see that coming. You need to develop that kind of technology in large companies like Statoil. Currently, we have a portfolio of offshore wind projects that are producing electricity to about 1 million households in Europe. If we develop all the projects that you see here, it will be enough to provide more than 5 million homes with electricity. So a significant contribution and a significant investment for Statoil. But we need to go beyond that. Renewables are excellent sources or solar and wind are excellent sources to decarbonize the simple or the easier segments of the energy sector. Electrical vehicles, air conditioning, etc., you can easily do that with solar and wind. But if you want to go more deeply into the transport sector, we talked about trucks. I think that's coming, electrical trucks, electrical buses. But if you go into heavy shipping, we did a little exercise because we are communicating with some of these players. How long do you think a cruise line can run on Tesla batteries before it has to recharge? 1,000 Tesla Powerwall batteries would take that ship or will run that ship for 1 hour, and then it needs to come back and recharge. So it says something about the problem. If you look at the heat segment, the biggest consumer of gas, at least in the European setting, we're using probably 3 times as much energy in the wintertime because of the cold winters. We're all experiencing that right now. How can renewables cope with that flexibility? Statoil, through our gas value chain, is offering that flexibility these days because gas is a storable energy source and we need to find other storable energy sources. I'm not going to claim that we have the solution, but at least we believe we do have one solution that can help us decarbonize the harder segments of the energy system, and that is hydrogen. The Norwegian government is actively pursuing, together with the industry, a full-scale CCS project these days, where we're going to capture CO2 from industrial sites at the east coast of Norway. I think this is a tremendously interesting project because it captures CO2 from industry that does not have an alternative. 25% approximately of CO2 emissions in the world come today from industrial processing, like producing steel, cement, fertilizer, etc. It cannot be eliminated by introducing renewable energy because it's not coming from the energy use, it's coming from the chemical processes. We are the proud developer, I guess, of the storage part and the transportation part of this project. But I think what makes us maybe the most excited about this is the fact that it will establish a CO2 storage hub on the Norwegian continental shelf. And with the CO2 storage in place, we can convert our natural gas into hydrogen. If you split natural gas into hydrogen and CO2 and store the CO2, you have all of a sudden transformed the natural gas into a clean burning gas that we can offer to almost all of the same customers that we're currently providing natural gas to. We're pursuing 3 different avenues, and that's the beauty, I think, of hydrogen. You can use it in all the energy segments. You can use it in transportation. Liquid fuel is a fantastic opportunity for the shipping industry. You can use it by reusing existing infrastructure in the heat segment. We're working closely with the city of Leeds, where the intention is to replace the gas, natural gas, with hydrogen, and people will then use hydrogen to fire up their homes and cook their food. And it's easy. The only thing you need to change is to change the burners in the homes. The existing infrastructure you can actually reuse. But we're also looking to use it into the power sector, where we have a project together with Vattenfall and Gasunie in the Netherlands, looking to convert this CCGT that you see on this picture to hydrogen. And this has immense impact and potential when it comes to CO2 reduction. If we just run this one plant on hydrogen rather than CO2, no, rather than natural gas, it takes away the equivalent amount of CO2 as 2 million cars. Tesla has received tremendous credit for their introduction of the electrical vehicles. They've sold about 300,000 cars so far. So with this one conversion, we can almost 10-double the climate effect to all the cars that Tesla have sold. So I believe that there is a great opportunity to change from inside the large companies. We have the technology to lead the way to a low-carbon future, and we certainly do intend to use it for whatever it's worth. So thank you for your attention.
So Irene and Statoil are clearly huge champions of hydrogen and CCS. Is it feasible? Where is the money going to come to subsidize this, get it off the ground? One of many questions that occurs to me. Let's start with someone in the expert group. Professor Mørk, what are you going to ask?
Thank you. I'm not going to take up that particular line, but well, I'm one of those people who are piqued by the idea of a hydrogen. But you mentioned burning it. How about fuel cells? Is that in your picture at all?
Well, if you're going to use hydrogen, liquid hydrogen in the shipping industry, you would need fuel cells. So yes, that's part of the equation.
But also in home heating, in city heating.
Yeah, but
isn't it very, very explosive?
Well, the interesting thing about the city of Leeds is that they actually developed their gas infrastructure based on hydrogen, or correctly, maybe I should say tone gas. which has more than 50% hydrogen in it. So the system itself was designed to run on hydrogen, and the idea is now to basically switch it back to that. So it has been done before, and it certainly should be able to do it these days with all the attention we now pay to safety.
I also thought that was a bit unbelievable when you were talking about. Are we really going to be cooking on hydrogen? That didn't, you know.
Yeah.
A bit science fiction.
Well,
Is it going to be safe?
yeah.
Okay, let's hear from someone we haven't heard from so far. Francis O'Sullivan from MIT.
Hi, Irene. Thank you very much for that. So my questions might be more commercially focused. So within the strategy that you outlined, the central one was value, new value, greater value, etc. And I think it's fair to say that in the transition from a kind of a fossil-based business to these new business models, there's really a question about how the commercial value creation benchmarks change, and how you overcome those challenges, how the equity markets are going to appreciate that, and so on. So I'm curious, given your role in kind of leading this, how is Statoil looking at this kind of different return environment that you're going to have to work within with this new business, and how you're going to kind of continue to grow value for Statoil, for the people of Norway in this transition?
No, it's a good and fair question. And I think we spent a lot of time internally to get to sort of an alignment on how do you compare an oil and gas project towards a renewable project. And I think the most obvious difference between the two are the risk picture. When you develop an offshore wind farm, at least up until now, when you have subsidies, there's no market risk involved. There's no subsurface or reservoir risks related to it. There's limited capex risk because you're installing the same turbine over and over again, and you cannot expect to get the same kind of returns as you're seeing in the oil and gas with a lot of inherent risk. The other thing is that by the time we get to an investment decision on an oil and gas project, we have a lot of sunk costs behind us. We've drilled a lot of exploration wells, some dry wells to get to the one discovery, appraisal wells, and so on. When you invest in an offshore wind farm, you do have some engineering studies behind you, but that's about it. So, we've developed our thinking, and clearly we're able to recognize that you cannot get the same kind of return, but they can both be attractive. The other thing is that we, and during this downturn, as an oil and gas player with limited downstream position, we've been exposed to how vulnerable we are to oil and gas price variations. So getting assets into our portfolio that has a different, or at least an oil price resilient, makes sense for us when it comes to diversification and so on. So clearly we're out there to build a business, but at the same time we recognize we need to invest some money in longer term options to be able to compete also in the future through R&D and so on.
So that's an additional commercial justification and underpinning for the strategy, I guess. Anyone in the audience want to receive the magical green box? Here we go. Well, sorry. Too forceful.
Hey, I'm Peter. I'm a student at NTNU.
Stand up.
Yeah, I'm a student at NTNU, and this is a follow-up on the safety of hydrogen. And it's not if it's actually safe, but if you think the public's going to accept it. You saw, like, when nuclear power came, it was said to be pretty safe, but people won't accept it because the public has the opinion, the thought that it's dangerous.
Good point.
I think you're pointing to something very important because there is perception and there is real life, and I think the biggest issue here is perception, but that's something we need to relate to as seriously as real risk, and education needs to take place. But I also think we need to start and try it out in not as exposed areas. We've been thinking about maybe introducing hydrogen in our gas turbines offshore. I think, with a lot of oil and gas flowing around, maybe that's not the place you start. Maybe you start onshore where you more easily to control it. But this is something that is part of the further development of this hydrogen value chain strategy.
So one more question from the floor, and I'm going to ask Petter Stoer to put it from SINTEF.
Okay.
It's on.
It's
Just
on,
bring it close by.
Yeah, a question, as I really like the idea of cleaning up Norwegian gas. The biggest market for Norwegian gas is Europe. And I think the key here is the question is, how would you kind of engage Europe in this change from natural gas to hydrogen?
No, we are already engaging them, and Sonia, who we already met here, is an active visitor to Brussels, and Brussels is an area to impact. But we're working with the British governments, and we're working with the Dutch government particularly as well. So it's about establishing. I think in the beginning, if we're looking at this Magnum plant, we need the same kind of subsidy scheme that we had for offshore wind a couple of years ago. That's what it takes to trigger this. So it's not tremendous amount of money or subsidies that needs to be introduced, but we need some willingness to help get this off the ground.
Irene will also be joining us on the panel after the break, but for now, let's say a big thank you. Irene Rummelhoff.